What is up, guys? Zendroid HD here, and this is going to be our first video regarding how to use design patterns in our Android application. Our language of choice today is Kotlin, and the design pattern we'll be going over is the builder pattern. Now, instead of giving you a complicated definition on what the builder pattern is, I felt that it would be better to show you why you needed it, as this should answer both of those questions for you. So what we're looking at here is your standard model. This is a model class that I call business. Has two constructors here. And so our business class has 6 variables. And just like you've seen before, we're using our constructors to set the values of those variables. And this one takes in all 6 of those variables, and this takes in only 2. And so the issue here deals with our first constructor. It looks really busy, and we're passing in a lot of arguments here. And the fact that they're all of type string adds more to our complexity, and I'll show you why. If I were to come in here and I was to accidentally change the order, and I was to put the name here and description here, our application doesn't show us any errors, and it shouldn't, because these are legit strings. We've passed in our strings, but the problem is these values are in the wrong order. And if you have a large number of arguments in your constructor and they're of the same type, it's that much easy for you to get them mixed up. Maybe you're programming late at night, you're tired, you just accidentally put them in the wrong order. Your app is going to run perfectly fine until you realize that some of the data is looking mismatched. So that's one of the issues here with having multiple arguments in your constructor. On top of that, it really doesn't make for clean code. And you can really look at this and tell it's not really clean. It seems like it's a little busy. And the second thing is that when we want to create this business class, and we may not want to mandate that you have to include all these variables, then we end up having to create multiple constructors taking in different objects, or excuse me, different variables here. So this one just takes in the address and the description. And what's going to happen is once we add our builder pattern to this, we'll see that we're not going to have overloaded constructors here, and we're not going to have to use multiple versions of the constructor. We'll just be able to use our builder pattern as it suits us. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into the code base and figure out how we can modify this so we can take advantage of that pattern. And so what we're going to do, we're going to create a class within our business model class here. And just like the pattern has called it, I'm going to call it builder. You can call it whatever you want to. If you wanted to call it business builder, you could do that. But the general lingo that you will see that it's called builder. It just makes it really easy to understand what's going on. So let's go ahead and do that. And what we basically have to do here is we need to have the same variables that we have in our model class here inside of the builder class, because that's where we're going to be actually getting the value from. So let's go ahead and set up our address, description, business name, number, start date, and the owner, of course. And one thing you'll notice is that I'm putting a private set on this. And the reason why is we're going to define our own setters for these variables. And you know, in Kotlin, when you make these public, then you're also exposing the getter and setter for these variables. And we're going to do something a little different here. And that's what really what's going to be the whole gist of the builder pattern. So we're going to keep going with these variables. And I'm giving them just a default value of an empty string. Okie dokie. So now we have those variables defined for our builder class. And the next part is what really makes the builder class, the builder pattern shine. We're going to define our own setters for each of these, but there's a particular part of that setter that I want us to pay attention to. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's see here. At this point, this setter should look very familiar to you, especially if you're coming from a Java background. And so, like I said, the important part of this setter is actually this part. This is the whole really meat and potatoes of the builder pattern. And we're going to put all our setters here. And I'm basically going to explain to you why this is so valuable. Alrighty, so at this point, we have a setter for each one of our variables. And one of the things that's really important here is the structure of this setter. You'll notice that they all return the builder class, the actual class that's setting up these variables. And so keep that in mind. I'm not going to really explain it. I'm more so going to show you why that's powerful. And the last part of our builder class is we have to build it out. So here we have a method that we're going to create called build. So let's go ahead and create that method here. And we are going to change up our constructor, and we're going to actually pass in the builder class here that we're creating instead of all those variables. And this is how our constructor should look. all it does is it takes in this builder class, and we're actually going to create and pass this value in inside of this build method. And that's it. Technically speaking, at this point, our builder pattern that we have created inside of this model class is actually complete. And so what we're going to do is we're going to jump into the main activity up here just to understand how to use it. And then I'll go over the different elements that are in this class that makes it so powerful. So I'm going to jump here into the main activity. And instead of us having to pass in all of these arguments into the constructor, we're going to do things a little differently here. So we are going to come in here, and I'm going to create another object of this class. So let's call it biz. So things are going to look a little differently. Instead of us doing it like this, we want to create that builder class. We're going to jump right into it. So we're going to create the builder class. And so let's go ahead and set up our address, name, and description. Set address. We're going to pass in the address here. Now this is where things are going to get really cool. Now normally what you would expect me to do is you would expect me to do so probably something like this, where I can have biz, I create the object of business, and let's say I have to set in each of these values individually. And what the builder pattern allows me to do, and why it's really called the builder pattern, is I can build out each of those arguments one by one. So we can have set address, and we can chain set address with set name, and I can chain that with the description. And this is where it gets really, really cool. So you notice that I've only created the variable one time for this business object, but I'm able to set multiple variables here, and they're chained together. How is it that these are chained together and you don't have to do something like here where you would come in and do business dot address equals, and then come in and do business dot name equals. So instead of me having to do it like this, which is what you're used to seeing, the builder pattern makes it a lot more fluid, where I can kind of chain all those commands together. This makes it really, really easy to see what values you're actually setting. You're being deliberate here. You're not passing in 6 different variables that could get out of order. When you say set address, it's a lot easier for you to understand, okay, I'm setting an address here. So what allows us to do that? Well, if we jump here back into this business class, you'll notice that our setters actually return the class here. It returns the builder. And because it is returning the builder class here, we're actually able to chain those calls together. It's no different from me if I was to call it like this, because it is returning that business class, or excuse me, that builder class. Then we're just able to chain them together like this, and it's a very clean way of doing it. So we'll go here and we'll set all the arguments that we need. And the last part of this is we build it. And that's why we have this method here that's called build. It returns our business object. And we see that it works. There it is. And so you can use this variable exactly how you would if you were creating it this way, but it's a lot cleaner doing it this way. And what makes this so cool is, guess what? If I only wanted to require that some parts of my code where they only gave me an address and a business name, I can just as easily take this out and it will work just the same with no problems and no errors. Cool thing about the business system pattern is that you can also set default values here. So if I wanted to set just the number to NA, then guess what happens? Later on in my code, even though I don't provide a number here, when I use it, it'll pull up NA if there isn't a value that I've set, right? And so, to be honest, at this point, even if you're starting out in Android, this should actually look very similar to you, very familiar. The alert dialog actually uses the builder pattern. And so, just as a quick example, if I was to go in, I was to create an alert dialog. You'll notice that I can go here and I can do dialog.setTitle, and I can chain that with .setMessage, and I can continue to chain that with set negative button. And so the builder pattern is actually a part of the Android SDK. And once you start using it in your models, you'll realize just how useful it is. It makes it really, really easy for me to chain these commands together, and it cleans up our code, right? All right, guys. Well, this wraps up our video today on the builder pattern. Make sure to subscribe and stay tuned, as I will be putting more videos out showing the design patterns here regularly. I want to thank you for joining me today, and feel free to check out the GitHub link below for a reference to the code base. I will see you in the next video. Take care.